thoughts. I had a couple I wanted to reference. One, if I could, then going to the revenue side, and I think it's important for future years. It's not in this year's budget, but with the opening of the new Sky River Casino in Elk Grove, the county some years ago negotiated an agreement with the Wilton Rancheria, and I appreciate Amanda following up to my question. And I think it was sent out to members of the board, but there will be a new revenue source that will be generated in the 23-24 budget. It'll start out fairly modest, but I think it's important to track that because it'll be dollars into the general fund. It'll also be dollars into both drug and alcohol treatment and domestic violence programs. And so, again, recognizing the budget process we use, but for the following fiscal year, 23-24, it'll be $915,000. $215,000 will go to county road maintenance, and there are some specificities regarding that in the MOU. But by year 6, the amount to the general fund will amount to about $2 million annually under the agreement, and that will be in perpetuity, or as long as that casino is there. And so I think it's important to recognize that. There may be other impacts that people will recognize as a part of that. There was agreement struck with the city of Elk Grove as well. But I guess my specific request to this is not dollars for this year. I wanted to point it out for one, but secondly, I think, Ann, it would be important to have, a budget page that shows those revenues so that, ever how is recommended to appropriate them, that the board would know going forward those dollars will come in and there will be a certainty to them. Some will go to specific program areas to address issues that have been anticipated. Others will be available to the budget folks and certainly to this board. So I wanted to point that out. That's an important revenue source if you're looking to the future. A couple of requests that I wanted to, and one, I think we actually dealt with it in June, but I guess we needed to have some additional direction around this, and you may be able to help me with this as it relates to some work that was done in the dollars that were set aside for Department of Transportation for the revenue replacement. Over the last few months, we've determined that the public walkways in the community of Locke, the boardwalks are actually within public domain and they're in need of some repair. But in order to try to facilitate, I think, and again, I appreciate your efforts, that of Dave DeFonte and others, to try to find a elegant way to address that. That I think it was contemplated that would be a set aside of $100,000 that would we would work with the Locke Management Association, and it would be secured dollars, but would be for that particular purpose, because it was thought for the better part of 20 years that those were somehow under jurisdiction of the town association, and to the contrary, that's not the case. And so I don't know if you wanted to help on this, but I want to make sure it's pointed out. So if you needed any additional authorization in the budget. Yeah, as long as you all agree, we can definitely set aside the $100,000 out of the revenue replacement. A one time. One time. Yes. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, looking at kind of to the larger initiatives, one thing that occurred to me, and again, this is an outgrowth of something that I think got interrupted by the pandemic, but I know that my colleagues will recall, I know Supervisor Desmond may have gotten via certainly observing the board, but back in 2019, we had quite a lively discussion, I think, in our board retreat that year, a good discussion about being an age-friendly community as we see the growing population of seniors in our community, and some of the things that we could do across departments, certainly under the leadership of the county exec's office, but in working with our community partners. And if I recall correctly, that there was actually discussion at the time, and then there was a presentation later in 2020 to the board about actually having a position that would be designated party within the exec's office to, oversee and to coordinate those activities. And it just occurs to me that as we're looking to certainly move out of the pandemic, but that we know what's been described as a silver tsunami is coming, and that folks that we talk about, folks who are fragile and vulnerable as it relates to their living circumstances. A lot of folks who are well into their years are living on minimal incomes. They're still housed. Some are housing insecure, no question. But folks are living longer, and I think as we talk about the quality of life and certainly services that this county provides, we're not the only ones. The Area 4 Agency on Aging, which we contribute to, funds some services. But I guess what I wanted to suggest, and I did it very briefly in my briefing with the county executive, was, again, I don't have anything specific, but I do think that there's the opportunity for us to begin to chart a course that gets us, one, prepared, but also allows folks to continue living independently if possible with services that be either provided by our nonprofit partners or by the county. And one of the things that has diminished in recent years, and some of it just because of the budgetary crunch, and I think some of the costs that were associated with it. But the peer support for the senior community and folks who may be isolated, whose family may be distant, but certainly desire to remain independent within their living situation. But that peer support is so very important, and it's not something that gets funded out of federal dollars typically for as meals might, or some medical attention or something like that, where the folks that, might be reliant on a friend or a neighbor, and a lot of folks do that. But I guess I would just suggest that to set aside some dollars to allow this board, certainly under your guidance, and to look at an initiative that would begin to, again, I think encompass what we said we were going to do, and being an age-friendly community, and there are a lot of elements that went with that particular designation, and they didn't all have money associated with them, but it seems to me, as we're talking about initiatives, that this would be one. And I guess I would suggest that if we set aside $500,000, again, under this board's authority to develop an initiative in working with our Child, Family, Adult Services division, but I think across the spectrum. And again, I certainly give the innovation and initiative, to the executive's office and her team to come before this board at a future juncture. But again, I don't see the issue as diminishing. It's only going to grow. And I think we want people to have, in any walk of life, in any age, to certainly have a dignified setting that we're able to. A lot of these folks have some wherewithal, but they're fragile and they're vulnerable. And as people live longer, I just think it's important as a community to maybe, nothing else, fund some additional volunteer coordination that helps the community to be a part of this, because we all have a role in it, and so I'm going to offer that as something for consideration to come back at 2:00. And again, I don't have much more than what I've suggested here, but I think it piggybacks on something that we said we were going to do. We've been very limited in that capacity thus far, but I think we have the ability to go forward and take a look at this. So I don't know, Ann, if you wanted to.
Yes. Are you recommending a specific dollar figure for this?
500,000 to set aside. Yeah. Okay, a couple others, and one, we had discussion in the June budget, and actually under the guise of the ARPA guided funds, I had suggested from District 5, and it looks like it wasn't going to be a fit, to do some expansion of the hospital, the animal hospital at the County Bradshaw shelter. And I want to say thank you to David Villanueva, and certainly Annette Bedsworth and Jeff Gassaway. They did some reconnaissance on this since our discussion in June, and it looks as though ARPA monies wouldn't fit for what was needed there. But I would just note that our animal care facility is now 15 years old. It's certainly newer than a lot of county buildings, but nonetheless, a lot of activity. And I think reflecting on, again, the commitment that this board, and again, I want to thank my colleagues and thank the executive team. Over the years, we've really, I think, begun to put in place, something that's exemplary for other communities and reflects, I think, well on our care for the four-legged critters in our community that certainly come into the shelter. But we know that spay and neuter, and certainly some of the life-saving things that are done at the shelter to get pets rehabilitated, or future pets, were really hampered. The hospital was not, clinic was not nearly big enough at the time. And so I did look at the funding and, again, tried to have an offset here. And I did note that going back into the budget, that we were fortunate because I think on the Valley Oak Youth Academy, there was about $1.2 million that got funded differently and was suggested to go back into general fund. And some of that probably spilled over to the reserves. My understanding is, and maybe David could help with this, Villanueva, but that the estimate is about $1.5 million to actually do the clinic expansion, David? Is that because I had suggested ARPA money to do a modular. Apparently, the modular would cost more than the hospital revamp, but you might want to just give me the specifics.
Yes, Supervisor Nottoli. Again, David Villanueva, Deputy County Executive. We did look at two options to expand the recovery area and the veterinarian and hospital area for the animal care center. The one option was to set up some sort of portable or some sort of temporary structure outside because of the infrastructure that's needed to have the various medical and utilities going out to that became more expensive to be put outside. So we've moved to a different suggestion or recommendation, which was to expand some of the current building and move out into a certain storage area and maybe expand the walls, if you would.
Okay.
Our estimate right now is about $1.5 million to do that.
That'd be a one-time expenditure, correct?
That's correct. That'd be a one-time expenditure.
Okay. So with that information, again, certainly would suggest that we set aside that capital for to do the improvements to the animal hospital. And again, I think there will be cost savings, again, attributed over time if we are able to expand the spay neuter activities in this community, which are dire, and is certainly in dire need. I think people are really stretched to the max. It will hopefully help us to address some of the inflow, which again, adoption and fostering, those things are really important, but that's when they arrive, if we can hopefully stem some of the numbers through good spay and neuter programs, I think that we all benefit in that way. So,
Mr. Chair, can I ask you a question about the request? So this would be for another surgical bay?
Yes, it would be expanded surgical.
And it would only be dedicated for spay neuter or other surgical needs? No,
it would be available to the hospital. It would be set up so we could do more volume of spay neuter, but it would be expansion of the clinic there.
And that comes with all the equipment that would be needed?
David, you need to ask that.
That's correct. We factored in all the equipment, surgery equipment, and other veterinary equipment.
Then we just need the veterinarians, right?
Yeah, well, I think we got
in July or in June, you did approve a veterinarian and 2 RVTs, which is veterinary technicians.
We approved those positions, but are they filled?
No.
Yeah.
But we did advertise. Actually, I take that back. The approval was postponed until it's on your budget now to be approved. So, but we made that recommendation, and I think Ms. Bedsworth made that recommendation when she did the workshop. She has been out advertising. She has been looking for vets. As you know, other community animal care shelters are having a hard time also finding veterinarians. So, but we're fortunate to have the 2 we have. They're fantastic and do outstanding work, but we are still looking for a third. And we're also looking for other opportunities to bring them in, maybe on a part-time basis or something different. But she's being very creative and trying to get those staff in.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Desmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I get a question for David. When we went out there on the tour recently with you and Annette, I think it was, right? Another issue was even with the existing equipment and surgery bays that they have a real limitation in terms of the recovery space, right?
Exactly.
So even if it's just additional space, with the current veterinarians we have, they'd be able to increase their capacity in terms of the spay and neuter. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was recalling that correctly.
That's correct. I would just add that the veterinarians have to have eyes on their patients as they're recovering, and the way that hospital was built doesn't allow for as many recovery areas. So this investment would include additional recovery areas.
Okay, thank you.
Or larger recovery areas. Sorry.
Good point, though. That's exactly right. Even with current staffing, you could probably do more. So, and lastly, this would be it's a modest amount, but and I actually was going through the budget here the last couple of days that we've had a category for a long time, wildlife services. Basically, that's been the component funding for the federal trapper services that deal with skunks and in some cases coyotes in the county, unincorporated, well, actually city and county, I believe. But we also have, and again, thanks to this board, we've funded for a number of years a nonprofit partner, Wildlife Care Services, which provide both relief to shelter systems in the county for wildlife, possums, raccoons, coyotes, a lot of birds and so forth. And it may not sound like a very important aspect, but it is because I think the interface, and part of this goes to the interface with a growing community, that as we grow closer to waterways and corridors and so forth, the wildlife wind up sometimes injured, but other times people encounter birds that have fallen from the nest, injured animals and so forth. Animal care responds to some of those, both cities and county, but other times people bring those into wildlife care. They've been providing service to this community for well over 25 years, depend upon a pretty strong volunteer network. And this county has contributed over time for a number of years $10,000 annually, and then it was increased a couple of years ago to, I believe, $35,000 annually. They continue, though, to struggle with the numbers. In fact, during COVID, they saw increase from about 6,000 animals of all different types. I described some of them to over 7,500, and that's held up the last couple of years. And the animals come from all over the county. They're not from out of county, and they do have folks that actually care for the animals in their homes, but they have a center out at McClellan. Some of you have visited the old radar dome there. But my specific request is that we raise their annual contribution. Again, it's done with a contract. This board has approved it annually, so to $85,000 a year, which would help them sustain the activity. And I would also suggest it might even put it under wildlife services, under that category. It's been administered out of the exec's office for a number of years, and thank you to Ann and her predecessors. But it might appropriately fall there. We talk about some of the predatory animals and nuisance animals, but here there's a services provided that really does, I think, show a good concern for the space we inhabit with the critters of the world. So that's my other request. So,
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I would just comment too that given the nature of our weather the last 72 hours, if you've communicated with those folks, they're getting inundated with requests for assistance for all the mammals and birds that you've mentioned by name that are suffering with 116-degree heat outside. So just another reminder of the services that they provide in the very immediate time frame.
Let me ask you, did squirrels survive?
We don't know yet.
Yeah, he was on a rescue mission over the weekend too. So, okay.
Supervisor Nottoli, was that an increase up to an annual contribution of $85,000?
Yeah.
Okay, so plus 50. Yeah.
Yeah, plus 50. Yeah.
Okay,
from what it is currently. Yes, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I just want to clarify.
All right. That's all I had on the list. So, any other things for consideration for the 2:00 session? Okay. You guys, is 2:00 even enough time? You want till 3?
Let's just say 2:15 to be safe. I just want to make sure that Amanda and her staff have time to
that's fine. Sure.
work on all this.
Okay.
So reconvene at 2:15.
Okay, so we're going to go to closed session now.
Yes.
And then we'll come back in chambers at 2:15.
And we are in the smaller conference room upstairs because the larger one is in use. Just so.
Okay, but we're going to put the smaller one in use as well. So. No.
Seventh floor. Seventh floor. We'll direct you. I just wanted to let you know we're not going into the usual room.
I apologize. Could I ask a clarifying question for all of the requests on the table? I understand the wildlife care would be an annual contribution. Are the others intended as one time? Or are there any that we should consider as annual?
The $5 million I've requested is for the life of the pilot. So,
Rich.
My request is one time.
One time.
Thank you.
And then I think for the senior initiative, if you're going to embark on something, I would say that would probably be, once it was put in place, that you would have some sort of an annualized amount in fairness. So, I mean, it would be $500,000 to start it out. Again, this board would need to develop it working with, the appropriate staff. So, whether it's more or less than that, I don't know. But I would think that would probably be something going forward if you're going to just do a 1-year initiative. So, okay.
And can I?
Sure.
So I imagine on Supervisor Cerna's proposal, of which I'm supportive, this is obviously relating to affordable housing. That's an ARPA eligible expenditure. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I'd like to also propose that out of that $5 million, that $1 million of it come from the District 3 second tranche of ARPA funding for the first year anyway, this first year.
I appreciate that. My only concern is because the time limit's on ARPA, we may not know the lifespan of the pilot. So is there any concern from staff about that?
Well, right. So certainly, if it were to be funded with ARPA, it would have to be committed by the end of 2024 and expended by 2026. So we have that limitation. The other thing is, while affordable housing is generally ARPA eligible, I couldn't guarantee today that this program, as it eventually, would be implemented, would be, because I think there's some details still to be worked out.
Okay. Well, I'll withdraw the offer then.
Well, we can explore that as part of our analysis of this project. And of course, if we did do that and it was eligible, we would just spend the ARPA money first.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And the reason I brought it up, just being cognizant of, obviously, this is going to certainly require an alteration of your strategy for reserves. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, any other comments? If not, then we will stand in recess until 2:15 into closed session.